we are welcoming you in the third part of our meetings with the senior faculty member of somatic experiencing, Maggie Kline. And we are happy that Maggie shares with us her knowledge. And this time we will see how Maggie is combining somatic experiencing with art to help traumatized children. So welcome, Maggie.
Thank you. So glad to be here. Thank you to Sladka and Tereska for organizing this time for us to be together and to support each other in the process of healing. So I'm ready to get started. I want to let you know that when children have to escape or hide, or they don't know exactly what's happening because they're very young and they're hearing loud noises and they know that something is horribly wrong, their body absorbs all of the shock, like shock absorbers in a car. And especially if they're under 3, but even under 5, very often what happens is they don't have any words to put their experience in. What happens is the memories of the terror get lodged in their deep psyche. And I have found that the best way to work with shock trauma for children especially, but I also use this with adults, but especially with kids, is to combine art with SE skills to help this deep psyche have a chance to express and put on paper the terror and then relieve it. So I'm happy to present today what I call, well, also escape stories, but the magic of the opposites. I work a lot with opposite polarities, and I in addition to the art, I put the SE elements of movement, and I use the artwork, the image that the child draws, as the eye in the SciBAM, for those of you who have SciBAM: sensation, image, behavior, affect, and meaning. So the children are actually expressing their affect and their sensations in their drawings. And the image comes from what they produce from their deep psyche. And then I'll show you what I do next to have them feel the kinds of movements that they needed to complete the experience and let go of the activation from the trauma. So I'll give you several examples, like I did last time, of different ages and different ideas. Okay, here I'm gonna screen share to show you some slides, because especially with artwork, pictures are worth 1,000 words. So here we go. So the magic of opposites. Let's see what we have first. I just want to show those of you who may not be familiar with somatic experiencing that trauma affects every part of our being, not just our emotions and our thoughts. Very often it involves our, especially with children, but with adults as well, their stomachs. It affects their digestion, ability to either eat food and digest it well. They may be constipated or not have an appetite, or they're always looking for something to soothe them in the way of food, usually sweets or carbohydrates, and will eat too much. So if their stomach hurts, it doesn't mean necessarily that they have a flu or that they're sick. Same thing with headaches or with sleep disturbance. These can all be symptoms of trauma. Tip the scales by providing opposite and pleasurable experiences. And one of those is through art itself, and another one is through having a lot of physical movement and art together. So I'm going to show you, first of all, one of the things I do with kids that have experienced violence or abuse or war is creating a safe space for them. And very often I show them this photo, this drawing of a child after reading a poem about the coyote chasing the bunny rabbit and how the bunny rabbit ran all the way to the log to find safety. So sometimes asking children to remember the first moment that they felt like they had some safety, that they were out of the immediate danger, and to draw it can be helpful. So I was working a few years ago with in Germany when the refugees were starting to come by boat to Europe from Middle East and Africa. And I'll show you some of the ideas I showed them. But when the kids start to do drawing, very often they come out of freeze and numbness. And when they come out of freeze and start to thaw, they'll often feel some anxiousness or anger. So it's a really good thing to combine movement so they have a place for it to go. Also, the last time when I did the gingerbread person, it's a wonderful way to have them express the sensations of anger in their body, where they're feeling them, whether it's in their eyes or their fists or their fire in their belly or they're in their legs for kicking, or their anxiousness, if they feel jitteriness in their legs for movement. And then you can have them show you the movement in slow motion, and this will release. But sometimes just playing active games like ball play will also help to dissolve some of that. So these are the kind of things I had the helpers I was working with that were working with the refugees. Did they have to climb over a fence? Did they have an adult that was able, or an older child, or even their own brother or sister that might have been almost the same age, or a friend that was able to lend a hand and help them during the escape? Kids love to draw these types of things, and it gives them the opposite of having to run away, and now they're running towards. So it's we want to get good images into their psyche. Fight and flee escape stories, how they got away. And you can use images from books too, to show how the tiger doesn't always have to chase us, that sometimes we can chase the tiger. So I wanted to show you this first, because I'm going to show you working with specific images children have, like nightmares and flashbacks, and then non-specific when they don't have nightmares or flashbacks, but they do have generalized anxiety or aggression or feelings of shutdown and numbness. So this is a before and after drawing that was done, where I had the class think of an issue that was bothering them that day. It's much easier to work with something from their experience that's happening in present moment, because healing trauma takes place in present. It doesn't take place during the most horrible part of the incident. It takes place in the here and now. So if you can have them think of something from that day or that hour, or if they can't, something that's recent, like that week that's bothering them. It could be something that just happened that's shocking, or it could be something that's more chronic, like a grandparent being ill that they're worried about. But whatever the issue is, you have them take a piece of paper and give them if they're little children, probably 3 minutes is enough. If they're older, 5 minutes, and have them make a sketch using colors and shapes to show what, if they check inside, what the issue is like for them. In fact, you don't even have to ask the little ones to check inside. Just ask them to show the colors and shapes of their issue. And so then you can do something like a beach ball game where you're tossing balls or tossing bean bags or playing a little running game of tag, and then have them stop and check in with how they're feeling. And sometimes what will happen is they were having a hard time playing the game because they felt a little bit frozen or like the ball was going to hit them. This is not uncommon. Some of the kids will be hyperactive and won't stop to pay attention to what they're noticing, and they'll just keep playing, and they might even get a little bit hard with the ball, and you have to stop. I have a nice little whistle like the physical education teacher uses in the gym or the coach uses during games. And I blow the whistle and I ask everyone to pay attention to how they're feeling in the moment and go around and let each person either pass or say something. And if they're feeling frozen, I just ask them to look around and make eye contact with the group members and the helpers. And then to notice how that is, knowing that the game stopped and that there's helpers around, and very often they'll start trembling a little bit. And that's the release of the trauma. So it's important to know the children don't have to speak about the unspeakable. They can express the deep psychic wound inside on paper without having to share what it was. Now, if they, of course, if they want to share, please encourage them to share whatever they'd like. But very often children don't even know how to put their experience into words. So after some play, if they're very young, it might just be 10 minutes of play with maybe 3 breaks every 3 minutes to stop and check in. If they're older, it could be 20 minutes of play with 3 check-ins in between. And then when they're all done, you have them go back to another piece of paper, to their colors, materials, and draw a picture to represent how they're feeling in this moment now, even as they look at their issue, how things have changed internally for them. Because we can activate the neural circuits of movement and healing by actually doing fun things, by play. It changes our physiology. So this is a wonderful exercise that I've found. Now, in working with large groups, like maybe a classroom of 35 or 20 or whatever, usually there's 1 or 2 that feel really numb and stuck. And that's okay. You can ask them, you can invite them to, if they would like to allow you to help them come out of their numbness. Or if they got super scared and they feel anxious or they're feeling angry, you can ask again if they'd be willing to let you help them, and it would help the other children as well to see how to move through states of anxiety, numbness, or anger. Okay, now we're going to go to a specific nightmare after a horrific incident. So this could be a murder. This was almost a murder. It was a brutal beating of a teenage brother, and this was a 6-year-old's nightmare. And he shared the fear of being chased. This is not the picture of him being chased. This is the picture of what happened afterwards. He just shared with me verbally that in his dream he was being chased, and I asked what he would do if he could, and he said that he would, it was a giant monster fish, and he would chase the fish, who would then chase the man, and he would be safe. So it's hard to read because he's just 6. He was chasing me and the man was chasing the fish, and I said stop, because I asked him what he would do, and he said he would say stop, and then he wasn't stopping, so then he bashed him. So when the children can feel that they have limbs, it's very nice to see his arms and his legs. that he has some empowerment to use his limbs to chase the fish. And so he stopped having nightmares after that. This was an 11-year-old boy who had night terrors. It was about an accident he had had when he was 3 that his parents didn't even register as anything traumatic. He had no memory of why he was struggling with night terrors, but his night terrors were getting worse and worse. It turned out from implicit memory from doing drawings, what we realized was that, and because I knew that the night terror started when he was 3 years old, he came to me at 11 because they were getting more frequent and worse, that it was actually from an accident that happened with broken glass. And I thought this was good to share with you because in a war situation with bombs and windows breaking, there's a lot of broken glass. Children get injured or they watch somebody else get injured. So he, of course, night terrors, there's no memory. I believe that they're dissociated dreams. They're dissociated nightmares. There's so much freeze in the body that there's no image, there's just a scream. So you can't actually work with the terror itself. You have to work with the nightmare to get to the terror. So in this instance, I had him draw a recent nightmare, and he drew these 2 warriors coming around the jagged rock. And it turned out the jagged rock was kind of like the jagged glass that he cut his neck. Actually, it was his jugular vein on his throat, and he could have died. And this is so common that because he didn't have a memory of it, and because the medical team did such a wonderful job with this boy, you couldn't even see where the scar was, that the parents and the boy don't register it as anything traumatic. But procedures, medical procedures and accidents are extremely traumatic, especially the younger the child is, because they have no words and it goes deeper and deeper into their psyche. And that's why emotional first aid for shock is so important. And I'm so happy to be working with a group that's working with as helpers with the refugees coming in so that these things can be worked with. So I had him imagine that he was the warrior. And it was 2 sessions and a very long session that I won't go into the short presentation. But at the end of the session, because he was empowered to be the warrior, and I asked him what he was noticing inside of his body. You can't really see it, it's so tiny, but it's a little yellow dot. I have an arrow. You might see a little speck on the paper. He was yellow. And I asked him to look at his picture. It's the image in SciBam, and to say what he was feeling. And the second session, we worked just with the yellow dot. And with his parents' anxiety as well. But he looked at the yellow dot and he said, I don't know what it means. Just like 11-year-old boys will do, they'll shrug their shoulders. I don't know. I have no idea. And I just looked at him and I said, yes, you do, because you drew it. So it came from way deep down inside of you. And he said, he was so cute. He said, you mean from my unconscious? And I said, yes, that's exactly what I mean. And his mother looked at him like, how did you know that word? And I said, yes, it came from your deep unconscious. So if you look at it, just kind of stare at it and feel what happens inside of your body, and see if you can share that. And he looked at it and he said, it's a ray of hope. It's a little ray of hope. And then I had him ask if he could notice where he felt it. It was in his chest. And then all of a sudden he said, I said, can you feel it spread? And he felt it spread like armor, like knights in shining armor protecting him. It came over his entire body. And After that, he felt really good. And his nightmares and night terrors that he'd been having for 8 years completely went away. A year later, I heard from his mom, and I thought she was calling to tell me they started again. And she said, "Oh no, there hasn't been any nightmare, no nightmares, no night terrors, completely gone." There's somebody else at his school from the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association, whose child has night terrors. And we just wanted to know if you would work with this child as well. They said it was like a miracle. So this is the power of art and SE. I had him move like the warriors. I had him feel his embodiment. I did other things too, but it's not important to go in. This healed quite a bit just doing this much. So that's an 11-year-old. I'm going to pause for a minute to have you check in with yourselves to see how you're feeling, how the audience is feeling. Take a little time to ground yourself and to feel how these drawings of children's terror, how it affects you, because I'm going to go into another one of a 13-year-old that was an even bigger trauma. So I want you to feel your feet and see, even though the magnitude of the traumatic event was so huge, how it resolved just as easily as with these other traumas. Working with the beach ball and just not even having a topic or a theme, working with a night terror and a nightmare. This was working with opposite drawings after the tsunami, the Southeast Asian tsunami. I went with a team of first responders. There were 9 of us from the SE community, and the devastation was enormous. You might want to just hold your heart and feel your ground, and also know that the children came out of their shock and were able to start the grieving process rather quickly by using somatic techniques of movement and art. So some of you may know Ale Duarte, my colleague. He was with me. He did the games, the active games, his background being from physical education and Rolfing. And he did a brilliant job. And that's part of the training program, I think, that you'll be in. You'll learn those games. But some of the older kids did not want to play the games. And so I brought them into the classroom and did opposite drawings. So this little girl, her name was Jump. She was 13, and I asked the kids in the class, I worked with, I think there were 20 kids all at once, and I had helpers with me, to draw anything they wanted. And most of the kids drew the devastation. So Jump was one of the ones that drew the devastation, and those represent the coconut palm trees that were all obliterated. There were none. There was not one house left in the village. So the helpers that went in, all of us together, we had to have time with each other to help self-care, to help us to release the stress and tension from what we were hearing, the stories we were hearing, and to allow ourselves to shake and to be heard, and then to eat together and to laugh together as a group before we did any strategic planning for what we might do the next day. So we also had the opportunity to have massages and other types of self-care, like walking on the beach, to help us. You need to take walks and get into nature if you can. And not just be constantly helping. Every day we helped, but every day we had self-care. It's important to have that balance so that you don't go into a state of numbness or burnout. So I asked the girl to describe, and you see the birds are flying in 2 different directions. But if you notice the devastation and the birds scattering and the clouds in the mountains, you'll also notice, just like that boy had a little dot to show a ray of hope in his own body, she showed a little sun peeking out. And in somatic experiencing, we talk about the traumatic activation being the trauma vortex. And we talk about the opposite of that being the counter vortex. And that it can be very small when there's been horrible shock because of things like war or enormous natural disasters. The enormity of the event, though, nevertheless, will still show a counter vortex within the person. So I asked all the kids then to put the paper aside. I gave them a second sheet of paper and asked them simply to draw the opposite of what they just drew. And this was the same girl, jump. And she drew this beautiful picture. And I asked her, please, to describe her picture, to tell me everything about it that she wanted to. And if you notice, the birds are all flying in the same direction. The sun is radiant and bright. There's still a few clouds. I think that could represent her grieving, or maybe that's just how it is in Thailand. Sun comes out and then the rain, and then the sun comes out again. So there's boulders, which are lovely because it shows some solidity in her drawing. She showed me how beautiful the coconuts were on the palm trees and her stream. So then I asked her to put her first drawing, to look at that for a moment, to even put it on top and to notice what happens inside. And she said she started to shake inside, that she got really shaky. I asked her to look at this picture and put this one on top, and asked her to stand up as she looked at it, and explained to her that when that shaking happens inside the body, it's our nervous system's way to make energy so that we can protect ourselves. And very often when we have to run away from something like or swim in a case of a disaster like this, that our energy wants to go someplace to protect us. So with some people, especially the adults, I noticed a lot of their energy went into their arms to jump on their Vespa and hold the steering wheel to go away, to jump on their motorbikes. For this girl, she said the energy was going down into her legs for running. And I had her imagine running along the stream. I said, where would you run to? And she said, to the high ground, meaning the mountains, to the safe place. So it's not always about running away, it's safety. So I had her run in place, and she ran fast at first. And I made eye contact with her and asked if she would run in slow motion for a little bit so she could really feel her feet touching the ground. I had to do this through translators, so it wasn't easy. My talk was very short, but just slow down, feel feet, move toward the mountain, along the stream. And she did it in slow motion so that she wasn't doing it in a dissociated manner. She could actually be in her body as she was running. Because very often the people are running and they are escaping, and they did make it to some place that's relatively safe, but they were dissociated. It was all automatic. It was the instinctual lower brain that provided them with automatic movement from reflexes in the cerebellum part of the brain. And so having to actually now come into the body and feel their power and feel the movement is what makes the actual event be in the past. So I had her look at it and ask what she was feeling now. And she said she could feel the flow like the river inside of her body, and that it was the first time she had felt any warmth since the tsunami had happened. Now, we were there 30 days after the tsunami, so it was a month later, and she had been frozen all that time. So this was so beautiful to have her feel this. And I asked her what that felt like. She said, and where? You want them to locate it so that the embodiment becomes deeper into the psyche. And she said she could feel it in her chest. It was like the rays that she had drawn of the sun moving out, radiating, were moving throughout her entire chest, her upper body. Then she had a very big smile on her face, just like the smile on the sun. This little moment to feel all your feelings as you watch my presentation. We're almost done. How are we doing for time? Okay, so the Hoberman sphere for tracking breathing is a wonderful thing, and it also shows children about opposites, how expansion and breathing deeply brings more breath into their body and belly, and more circulation and more life and vitality. And when they exhale, they contract, and that's normal, but they don't want to contract and stay stuck at a very small opening when they expand. They want to be able to have a full range of expansion and contraction. So my last presentation is about a boy named Rainer. He gave me permission to use his name and to show his work. He said that he was so happy that I gave him the opportunity to be able to help other children that were suffering. This boy also had suffered for anxiety for 8 years, and it was getting worse as he was getting older. And he would have a recurrent nightmare. So I had him draw his nightmare for me, and he drew it on an iPad. This is, I did this during the pandemic on Zoom, and he made this drawing for me. And he told me that he is the little boy lonely walking behind the van or the SUV, and his father is in the van driving away. And his father doesn't see him. And the nightmare was that his father just couldn't see him. Now there's a lot of multiple layers to this story. But the fact is, the boy's anxiety and nightmares started at 3. So I always ask, what happened at 3? In a case where you're working with the war, you can ask, when did the anxiety start to happen and what made it go away? So what I did with him is I just had him sense what he was feeling, and not for very long, and then immediately draw an opposite picture of what the opposite would be like for him. And this is what he drew. He said his father sees him, gets out of his car, out of the truck, comes to him, and they hug. So I had him feel what it was like when he looks at that picture, to feel his father looking at him, making eye contact, and then giving him a warm embrace. And he felt a very warm embrace. And he stopped having so many nightmares after that. He still had nightmares, but I had 2 sessions with him, and I taught him skills of what to do if somebody was grabbing him, because he started having nightmares of being kidnapped, and how he could, when he woke up from his dream or his nightmare, that he could use his limbs to escape and to feel it, to actually in slow motion feel what he would do. And then he could draw pictures of it or not, of what he did to escape. But I said, how is your anxiety? And he said, since we work together, he feels like he can manage it himself, because even if he has a nightmare, he's been using all the skills I taught him, and the anxiety goes away immediately. In fact, he said to me, as I did a year follow-up, he said, since we work together, my anxiety has severely reduced. It's not correct English. Severely reduced, but what he meant was seriously reduced. So I love that. Severely reduced seems to be appropriate. He has his anxiety manifested anytime he was outdoors and he had to be alone, like waiting at the school bus stop or walking home alone. And he doesn't have that anxiety anymore, just an occasional nightmare that he handles himself, and they're very rare. No more night terrors and no more anxiety during his waking day. So he's able to have his life back. So there he is. That's it. There's some resources for you. You can take a screenshot of that if you would like. Okay, I can't send you the slides of the children's work to keep, but what I can do is I hope you keep that in your memory and you can keep the resources. So that's all for today. I'm going to come back to say goodbye to you, and I need help from my, oh, there we go. I can stop the share myself this time. Okay, stop. And I can come back to see all of you again. I can't see you. I can only see the beautiful radiant faces of Tereska and Sladka, who have been my friends for over a decade now.
I think
So Tereska, go ahead.
it's amazing, and we really hope that this will be inspiration and support for all the helpers that they are now coming into contact with a lot of kids who were escaping from the war, and they are now in the schools. And I think whatever from this opposite drawing can be very helpful and can be utilized very well for help. So this is our wish.